This one's hard to talk about because it's not about sellers who made obvious mistakes. It's not about the ones who overpriced dramatically or refused to stage or listed with bad photos and hoped for the best. This is about sellers who did it all. They listened to every piece of advice. They staged beautifully. They hired a good photographer. They priced within a reasonable range. They kept the home show ready for weeks and it still didn't work the way they expected. That's the cruelest version of this. Not doing something wrong, doing everything right for the wrong situation. And it happens more often than most people realize. In this video, I want to explain why execution alone doesn't guarantee results and why strategy, not effort, is the thing that actually separates homes that sell well from homes that quietly miss. I'm Cucoch from Royal LePage Signature, and I run a real estate team in the Toronto West and Mississauga areas. So if you're ready, whenever you're ready, there's a link in the description. If you'd like to book a discovery call with me, go ahead, you can book right into my calendar. Let's start with the checklist. Most sellers approach the process with a mental list of things they believe matter. Paint, clean, declutter, stage, photos, price competitively, list. And those things do matter. I'm absolutely not saying that they don't. But the assumption underneath that checklist is the problem. The assumption is if I do all these things well, the market will respond. And that's just not how the market works. The market doesn't reward effort, it rewards alignment. Alignment between what you're offering, how you're positioning it, and what buyers are actively comparing it against. Effort without alignment is just expensive preparation for a listing that doesn't land. And here's the thing that makes this so difficult to accept. From the seller's perspective, they can't always see the gap. They look at their home and it looks great. And they look at the price and it looks fair. They look at the photos and they look professional. Everything checks out. But the market isn't grading them on a checklist. The market is comparing them to a very specific set of alternatives. And that comparison doesn't care how hard the seller worked. So what does alignment actually look like? It means the home's positioning matches how buyers are currently behaving, not how they were behaving 6 months ago. It means the pricing posture doesn't just seem fair on paper. It creates the right psychological response in the specific comparison set your home enters. It means the presentation doesn't just look good. It reads correctly to the type of buyer most likely to act. Alignment is about fit, not quality. A perfectly staged home can still miss if it's staged for a buyer who isn't shopping in that price range. A beautifully photographed listing can still underperform if the photos emphasize the wrong features for the neighborhood. A competitively priced home can still sit if competitive was calibrated against last month's market instead of this month's. This is what makes this so frustrating for sellers. Everything looked right, it just wasn't pointed in the right direction. Let me put it another way. Imagine training for a marathon. You do everything right. You follow the plan, you put in the miles, you eat well, you rest properly. Then you show up on race day and discover you've been training for a flat course, but the race is all hills. Your preparation wasn't wrong, it was just mismatched. That's what happens when sellers execute well against a strategic frame that doesn't reflect what the market is actually doing. Here's something that doesn't get discussed enough. The market moves faster than most preparation timelines. From the moment a seller decides to list to the moment the home goes live, weeks or even months can pass. During that time, new listings appear, comparable homes sell or don't sell, buyer expectations shift, inventory changes, interest rates move, the competitive landscape rearranges itself constantly. And most of the time, the preparation plan was built for the market as it was at the beginning of that timeline, not as it is at the point of launch. So sellers finish their prep, list the home, and discover they're entering a market they didn't fully account for. The staging is beautiful, but the comp set has changed. The price was fair, but a new listing down the street just gave buyers a better option. The photos are strong, but buyer attention has shifted to a different part of the neighborhood. None of that is the seller's fault, but it all does affect the outcome. And the longer the preparation timeline, the more likely the market has moved underneath the plan. That's why strategic preparation, getting the house ready and then listing, is incomplete. The strategic layer has to be current at the point of launch, not current at the point of decision. There's often a gap between those two moments, and that gap is where misalignment quietly forms. This is where it gets personal, because sellers who did everything right and still missed feel something very specific. They feel betrayed, not by an agent, not by a buyer, but by the process itself. They followed the rules, they did what they were told, and it didn't work. This feeling is real, and I don't want to minimize it. but I also want to name what actually happened. In almost every case I've seen like this, the seller did fail at execution. They were operating from an incomplete frame. The checklist was correct, but the strategy behind the checklist was either outdated, generic, or borrowed from a market that no longer exists. And that's not the seller's fault either, because most advice sellers get is task-based, not strategy-based. Do this and this and this. Not here's why these things matter in your specific competitive context, and here's what we need to adjust based on how the market is actually behaving right now. That second conversation almost never happens, and it's the one that matters the most. When it doesn't happen, sellers are left holding a checklist that feels complete, but a strategy that has a hole in it. And the market finds that hole every time. Let me give you a real example of how this plays out. Imagine two sellers in the same neighborhood. Both hire good agents, both stage their homes, both get professional photos, both price within the range suggested by recent sales. One home gets 3 offers in 10 days. The other gets polite interest and no traction after 3 weeks. From the outside, those homes look nearly identical on paper, but one was positioned for a buyer pool that was actively searching in that range. The other was positioned for a buyer pool that has just shifted its attention to a newly developed pocket 2 kilometers away. Same quality of preparation, different strategic alignment, completely different result. Now, was the second seller's agent incompetent? Not necessarily. Was the home in poor condition? No. Was the price unreasonable? It wasn't. The issue was that the market context around the listing had shifted, and the strategy didn't shift with it. That's the gap. And it's a gap that is almost invisible until weeks have passed and the results speak for themselves. This is why blanket advice, the kind you find from articles or on social media from well-meaning friends, only goes so far. Because advice without context is just information, and information without a strategic frame is just noise. There's an important distinction here that I want to be very clear about. I'm not saying preparation doesn't matter. It absolutely does. I'm saying preparation is necessary, but it's not sufficient. You can prepare flawlessly and still miss if the strategic layer is wrong. Think of it this way. Preparation is about making your home the best version of itself. Strategy is about making sure the best version is pointed at the right market, at the right time, with the right positioning. Without preparation, you're not competitive. Without strategy, you're competitive in the wrong race. And the wrong race is the one where your home looks great, but great in a category buyers aren't prioritizing, or great at a price point that now has a better alternative, or great in a way that doesn't address the specific hesitation buyers feel about that type of home in that location. This is subtle stuff. It's not dramatic, doesn't make for exciting headlines, but it's the difference between a home that sells confidently and one that slowly stalls while the seller wonders what went wrong. So what's the takeaway here? It's not that you should stop preparing, it's that preparation should follow strategy, not replace it. Before you paint, ask, what is the buyer for this home actually responding to right now? Before you stage, ask, what comparison set is this home entering, and how do I need it to read? Before you price, ask, what does this number say relative to the alternatives the buyer is seeing this month, not last month? Those aren't checklist questions, they're strategic questions, and they require current, specific, competitive intelligence to answer well. Not general knowledge, not outdated comparables, not assumptions from a faster market. Real information about how buyers are behaving right now in your specific segment against your specific competition. That's what strategy actually is. And it's the layer that separates sellers who do everything right and succeed from sellers who do everything right and still come up short. If you're preparing to sell or are already somewhere in the process and wondering why traction hasn't come in the way you expected, I'd encourage you to step back and take a look at the strategic layer before adjusting anything else. That's exactly what a strategic listing readiness review is designed to do. It's not a critique of your preparation, it's not an evaluation of your effort, it's a diagnostic of your positioning, how your home fits into the current competitive landscape, what buyers in your segment are actually responding to, where the alignment gaps are, the ones that no amount of staging or pricing adjustment will fix on their own, and what it would take to close those gaps before you list or before more time passes on the market. If that kind of clarity would be useful, there's a link in the description. Doing everything right should lead to the outcome you expect. When it doesn't, the answer is almost never work harder, it's look deeper. In the next video, I'll explain why waiting for the right time to sell often costs sellers more than they realize, even when it feels like the cautious choice.